Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Unity RPG tutorial. So in this tutorial I'm going to be teaching you guys how to set up a portal entrance to a dungeon. Now we can set this up to make it so the player needs to meet different requirements to enter that dungeon, such as level or attunement, and or a certain quest that they need to complete in order to just enter the dungeon or anything like that. So the first thing we're going to do is go to our dungeon. And we're going to need to set up a few things for both the entrance and the exit. So the first thing I did was just create a basic scrolling texture there. And then behind it I created a box, if you can select it, just a simple box trigger. And what you're going to want to do is set this to enter dungeon, and then our other one's going to be exit dungeon. Now what we're going to be doing is referencing, we could also just make one tag that's just called a portal or something like that, because what we're actually going to be referencing is the name instead. Because in this case, if we have a bunch of different dungeons, we don't want, hundreds of different tags. We would rather just reference the actual name that we have on here. But we're just letting Unity know that we're going to be entering a dungeon or exiting a dungeon, so we're going to be doing different things for that. So for the entrance, we're just going to need to set up enter dungeon, and I named mine dungeon 1 entrance. And also out here, we need to set up a node to teleport to when we want to exit our dungeon. So this is going to be referencing where we want to place the player outside of the dungeon when they enter into the exit spawn, or the exit trigger I should say. And for this, you can just go to game object and create empty, and it'll create just an empty game object that we can use to reference a position. So I just set mine up here. So if we go down under the train, this is where I set up kind of a little playtest dungeon, I guess. We don't really have any models here, just a couple of boxes, but this is going to be our exit. So I named this dungeon 1 exit and set the trigger to exit dungeon and whatnot. And I did dungeon 1 entrance spawn here. So when we actually go through the other trigger and enter into the dungeon, we want to spawn our player at this point. So we could offset from this spawn point and spawn our player from the center of this over a little bit, but I think it's easier just to set this up at the beginning. And also, if your player has applied gravity and we make a fade screen, we won't see our players fall to the ground. Or we could set up something in the future to make our player spawn directly onto the ground. So if we scroll out real quick, we're just going to jump into our code now and go over how to set this up. So from here, we're going to be using onTriggerEnter to actually call when our player enters the triggers that we created. So this is the bit of code that we're going to add for our dungeons. You could also set this stuff up so we have a completely different function that just handles the teleporting when we enter or exit a dungeon. But for now, we're just going to leave it in here just to make it simple. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is check if we entered the onTrigger for enter dungeon. So that's what we named the entrance of our dungeon. And from here, we actually want to check the name of the game object that we entered. So if we ended up entering dungeon 1 entrance, then we want to move our player to dungeon 1 entrance spawn. So this will spawn us inside the dungeon at the empty game object that we set up. So it's just taking the player's position, it's finding the object in the world. You could set this up as a game object within your code, but I find it easier if you're working with a lot of different things just to find the object in the world, especially if it's close to your player. So we're just going to be setting our player at the transform position of that object, and that's what we're going to use to teleport there. So the same exact thing for our exit dungeon. It's pretty much the exact same code. We're just referencing different objects and where to move our player to. And that's pretty much all we need. We can make this a little more complex and add in a level cap system. So maybe you need to be level 10 in order to enter this dungeon. You could set that up in here. Just do not call this code if the player's not the correct level, and print out error text that they're not a high enough level to enter the dungeon. Or we could set up a complex quest system that the player has to complete a bunch of quests in order to get approved to enter this dungeon. And also we'd want to check if they need to be in a certain party size. So some dungeons might require you to have 5 players or 10 players or more. So yeah, that's the basic way of setting this up. So I guess we can just jump into game and I can show you it in action real quick. So this might take a minute to actually walk over to the dungeon. I guess I just want to show off the world if anybody's been interested in what I've been working on. I haven't been working on it too much. I've been doing a couple of different projects lately, but this is one of the main things I just do for fun. I might end up doing a live stream in the future or soon here covering some more of the level design aspects. If anybody wants to watch that, just let me know. But yeah. So the dungeon is right up here. I haven't really laid out too many ground textures like I did over here for this area. It's still just a basic layout and stuff. So now that we're at the dungeon entrance, I just wanted to say that if you're going to put something like a effect in front of it, you should disable the actual collision on the object itself, just so your player can pass through it. Because the actual trigger itself is right behind this, so if you're running into that issue where you just can't pass through, you're going to have to remove your mesh collider or whatever collision is on that object. So yeah, if we just jump into the portal, you can see that we spawn into our dungeon. Now, we don't have anything fancy set up like a fade screen or a loading screen where we can actually place our player onto the ground and wait until everything's loaded until we actually fade out and back into gameplay. So that's something we can include in the future. And yeah, so this is just a basic little testing area. And yeah, we're just going to jump back into our exit and we should teleport right back out front. Because as you see, when it loads like that, either you could place the game object a certain height above the train just to make sure that your player is placed somewhere onto it, or we could do some code like we did with the actual the enemy where we place them on the ground when they spawn, just so we don't see them falling out of the sky when they're coming through these different portals. And so yeah, that's something we can definitely work on in the future, and we could add some of that other stuff that I talked about levels and questing and stuff. So hopefully we can integrate a lot more things into this and add more to it. So yeah guys, until next time, I'll see you in the next tutorial.